I am really glad that Peep Show is today seen as one of the finest British sitcoms ever made, and also that it's recognised in its own right and isn't just the thing that Jesse Armstrong did before Succession, or part of the Olivia Colman origin story, because it wasn't always as celebrated as it is now. I remember feeling hyped, but also kind of alone in that hype when I started seeing trailers for a new series show up in the ad breaks on Channel 4. Back when it was actually on the air, Peep Show was popular, sure, but it was the sort of show you'd hear about from a friend of a friend, or you'd hear about it after seeing David Mitchell and Robert Webb show up in other things. I first tried it in the mid-2000s when I was a teenager after watching a sketch show that Mitchell and Webb did called That Mitchell and Webb Look, which was sold to me by the friend who recommended it as, it's like Little Britain, but better. Yeah, this is how far back we're going. Little Britain was both still a thing and popular at the time. That Mitchell and Webb Look was really fun if you never saw it. I understand why it never saw the same level of success as Little Britain, because the sketches often have a much more sarcastic and cynical tone to them, and they rely more heavily on meta-humour, surreal concepts, and historical or literary characters. The most famous sketch from the show that's now become a meme is this one, where Nazi soldiers have a slow realisation.
Hans, I've just noticed something.
These communists are all cowards.
Have you looked at our caps recently? They've got skulls on them. Have you noticed that our caps have actually got little pictures of skulls on them? Hans, are we the baddies?
When I first saw this in 2006, I would not have been able to tell you that this would go on to become such a useful reference point in the wake of basically everything that's happened in the last decade. It was through being a fan of That Mitchell and Webb Look that I found out about this sitcom that David Mitchell and Robert Webb were also in called Peep Show. I found DVD copies of the first two series in a charity shop, and from that point on I was hooked, and Peep Show slowly became the defining show of not just my adolescence, but my 20s and, well, my 30s so far as well. It feels weird to make this parallel, but while most of the people that I knew at school were watching the Channel 4 show Skins, which is about some dysfunctional teenagers with all the usual problems, parental conflict, drugs, relationships, and presented in a way that teenagers could relate to it because they were going through similar things, and my peers felt like Skins reflected their lives, my equivalent to that was Peep Show. But not because it entirely reflected the life that I was living as a stupid teenager in about 2007. It's about two 20 to 30 somethings called Mark and Jeremy who share a flat and have various career and relationship related misunderstandings and breakdowns. Mark's stuffy, old-fashioned and neurotic, Jeremy's a jobless airhead. These characters' lives were nothing like the life I had as a kid who lived at home and was doing his exams and worked in a shop. But the reason I feel it appropriate to draw this comparison is because Skins was largely for the kids who were accepted by their peers, and I never related to Skins because I spent my teenage years feeling like a weird outsider who never belonged in any group of people that I surrounded myself with. And in that isolated place, Peep Show came along and it said to me, "Yeah, Stuart, you know that feeling you have that you don't belong here? It's not going to go away when you grow up. As you grow up and into your 20s and 30s, and probably for the rest of your life, you're still going to behave awkwardly around others, you'll make mistakes that will piss them off, you'll trip over your words, and you'll spend the rest of your existence feeling uncomfortable, horrible, and like you just want to curl into a ball and die every second that you're awake, because that's just the result of you being in some way defective as a human being." Oh, happy birthday, by the way.
I could learn to like football and live with him and learn his ways. We'd have a laugh and I could be in the mainstream of the culture instead of lying like a freak in our weird puddle.
So what I want to do in this video is explore the show, its characters, its story arcs, and try and understand why I found Peep Show so comforting, in spite of just how aggressive it was. In a previous video I explored how Friends set realistic problems that 20-somethings would typically encounter inside a cuddly network TV framework, where even if it didn't always have resolutions at the end of the episode, you usually left the experience feeling warm and comforted. Peep Show isn't like that at all. Mark and Jeremy are humiliated at almost every turn, and most episodes end with the plot being unresolved and Mark or Jez on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and more often than not, the next episode will then just start with little or no reference to what just happened last week. Sometimes Jeremy wins at something while Mark loses and vice versa, but there are very few happy endings in Peep Show, and I felt like this show truly got me on an emotional level, and I want to explore why. While Peep Show can be over the top and silly, it's ultimately a show about brutal truths, completely unvarnished by any attempt to offer the viewer any form of comfort. And that intent is written all over the show, even down to its title. The show is named after a type of live sex show that was primarily popular before the development of home video, where people would go out to a venue and watch some kind of show or film through little viewing windows. The name was used in this case because Peep Show is mostly made up of point of view shots where you see what Mark or Jez are seeing through their eyes, as if you're looking into their lives through one of those little viewing windows at a Peep Show. And it fosters an intimacy with the characters, partly because this point of view style means that characters Mark and Jez are talking to stare directly at the camera, at you when they're talking. And it's made even more intimate because you can hear Mark or Jeremy's thoughts.
Women don't want your hand under their bottoms, Mark. She sat on it, officer. It was an accident. Of course it was. Now, get in with the nonsense.
Understanding Peep Show's appeal is essentially like trying to understand what turns someone on.
Kind of like a modern day eunuch, aren't you, Mark?
Yes, I suppose so.
There are multiple ways of understanding the voyeur who's looking through the window at a Peep Show, because everyone's turned on by different things. On one level, there could be a degree of power to it. Although yes, in reality the people performing in the Peep Show know that the peeper is watching, this is a controlled environment. But on a sexual level, the voyeur may be experiencing a thrill at the idea that they can see what's going on while the people on the other side of the peephole are none the wiser. On the other hand, it may be a humiliation thing. The peeper has been stuck on the outside with a small window into the scene where people partake in pleasurable acts in the full knowledge that the peeper can only watch these acts but isn't invited to join in. And some people find this the turn on. He's a small, pathetic character, the peeper, and that's what the show's honed in on. Quite a lot of the time, Mark and Jez's thoughts interrupt the action specifically to emphasise how pathetic they are as people.
Can I kiss you, Sophie? Oh my god. What about my abnormal knackers? Oh, this is nice. How weird are they?
And the way Peep Show has used this format to recreate the experience of the peeper indulging in their humiliation fetish is they've made the viewer essentially embody Mark and Jez. You're not just peeping into their lives like you're watching a Peep Show. That viewing window is you. You are Mark. You are Jeremy. It sticks you inside Mark and Jez's heads as they watch their lives fall apart in the most humiliating scenarios possible. Mark's meant to be giving a big presentation at work, but he's got nothing.
I feel like my head's going to explode. Relax, Mark. Heads don't explode. It's much more likely you'll just get a tumour.
But the idea of the peeper experiencing a degree of power isn't totally lost in the way the show is designed, because these point of view shots aren't just limited to Mark and Jeremy. Entire scenes are shot from Mark's perspective, and the perspective of whoever he's talking to, or sometimes just a random unnamed bystander. We'll be inside Mark's head as he either says something or takes in something that someone said, then we'll ping to someone else to see his reaction to what they've said through their eyes.
What?
I'm sorry, I'd love to play another game, but I've been invited to this dinner thing.
I thought we were going for dinner.
Oh yeah? We never said.
I thought we said.
Let's take a look at this episode where Mark's high and he's out bowling with a teenage girl. A shot like this one looks like an ordinary wide shot for a moment, then we cut to Mark's point of view and we see that his love interest Sophie has shown up in the background.
Oh my god. Oh my god.
And you go, so that wide shot was actually Sophie's point of view all along. We were inside Sophie's head, watching a dishevelled, stoned Mark behaving like an idiot with this teenager he's just met. This particular setup works to show us how people come across differently depending on the perspective. Inside Mark's head, he feels great. He's having a great time with this girl. Inside Sophie's head, he looks pathetic. You're often inside the head of a character who has power in a scene, who sees Mark or Jeremy as inferior. Sometimes it's Alan Johnson, Mark's boss, sometimes referred to by Mark in his head as Daddy, and his purpose in the show is to put people in their place.
Project Zeus,
You will not be informed of the meaning of Project Zeus until the time is right for you to know the meaning of Project Zeus. Oh, right.
I do sort of like it when he's rude to me.
Sometimes we see from the perspective of Mark's love rival, Jeff. Jeff is such a slimy character that you just want to punch this guy in the face with his every interaction where he's out to show Mark that he sees him as a piece of dirt under his shoe. You always feel so horrible in a scene between Mark and Jeff, but you're not always inside Mark's head in his interactions with Jeff. Sometimes you are Jeff.
There's no threat from you, pal. You could have your cock in it. You still wouldn't have the balls to fuck.
You always leave a scene between Mark and Jeff feeling disgusted or violated in some way, and part of that is because of Neil Fitzmaurice's completely on-point performance, but there is another reason. We've spent so much of this show inside Mark's head, listening to his thoughts, his fears, his anxieties and insecurities, that we really don't want someone to hurt him, because we've been made to empathise with him. He has horrible thoughts and does horrible stuff that makes us judge him, sure, but because we're hearing his thoughts, we're hearing his side of the story, and so we sympathise with him. And so in scenes between Mark and Jeff, we've just spent half the scene inside the head of someone whose goal in life appears to be to completely humiliate Mark. That's the purpose of Jeff's character. We might not be able to hear Jeff's thoughts as we watch Mark from his point of view, but we almost feel like we're part of this humiliation process. Because, well, we are. It's a television show, a comedy show that we typically enjoy. We come to it wanting to see Mark get humiliated because it is funny, even though we empathise with him. Granted, it's a case of watching through your fingers in most cases. Peep Show is one of the most extreme examples of the genre of cringe comedy, being a show where by design you've got a character behaving outside of social convention, while everyone else in the room looks on with a face that goes, "Oh god, please no, why are you doing this?"
The truth is, I suppose I like you. Is that such a crime? I like you, and if you can't handle it, you can just, fuck off.
This style of TV comedy was mostly popularised by British comedies. Conventional understanding of sitcoms in the late 20th century was that American comedies featured characters for you to laugh with, while British comedies featured characters for you to laugh at. Because the style of humour on British TV tends to fit the goal of creating a character for you to laugh at without feeling too guilty about it. In Peep Show, you are laughing at Mark and Jez when something terrible happens, but there is a more empathetic level to it than most British cringe comedies like Alan Partridge or The Office. Peep Show's point of view technique means that, as said, you're essentially inhabiting Mark and Jez as you hear their thoughts, so you empathise with them on an emotional level, but also its use of cringe comedy is so effective because you can't stop them from doing what they're doing, even when you really, really want to. Even though you're looking through their eyes, these are your hands, you are Mark. You should be able to make Mark put the phone down when he's got through to Sophie's answer phone and is leaving a cringe-inducing message that's going to cause embarrassment at the office tomorrow. You are Jeremy. Mark's your mate. You should be able to lunge for him and grab the phone and stop him, but you can't, because it's a TV show. It's not an interactive experience.
Then I go and spoil it all by saying something stupid like, I like you.
Peep Show is like being trapped inside a nightmare, or having an episode of dissociation, where it feels like you're not really present and your body appears to be out of your control. As a result, Peep Show was always best placed to deal with some of the darkest topics known to art. Peep Show goes incredibly far in the traumatic experiences it subjects Mark and Jeremy to, particularly Mark, some of which are so horrible that I can't even reference them in this video. But it gets away with going as dark as it's possible to go in a comedy show because it's such an accurate depiction of how someone undergoing a trauma response would behave. They dissociate, they feel emotionally detached from their surroundings. As someone who suffered from depression for most of my life, Mark's train of thought is the most accurate depiction of what depression feels like in any form of art. Your train of thought will occasionally interrupt you with various put-downs and reasons why you're a failure. Mark's brain is constantly attacking him.
Well, there he goes. The first friend I've made since Nick Bickford in '96. And I'm pretty sure Nick didn't really like me.
While Mark and Jeremy are comedy characters and are exaggerated, the style of Peep Show is what makes it feel so realistic. And this realism is also reinforced by the fact it does look quite rough around the edges. But that rough look is deliberate. It's the same way Picasso described how it took him 4 years to learn how to paint like Raphael, a lifetime to paint like a child. Peep Show's locations are quite clinical when it comes to the offices, quite dank and messy with their flat, and they feel very naturalistic. The lighting is incredibly harsh, the shots are so close to people's faces that you can make out every detail in their skin. The cameras are always shaky, I really love the camera work in this sequence here where Mark and Sophie are getting drunk together in his office. Just looking at this scene, you feel drunk. A lot of the time, present a shot from Peep Show in isolation and at low res, and it looks like someone's janky vlog that they recorded on their phone.
The only reason that I don't go to church is that, for me, everything's a church. This room is my church. Cost Cutters is a bloody cathedral.
They're also restricted in what shots they can feasibly use that keeps a coherent style, because if they're shooting it as almost entirely point of view, if they've got a scene that's only got 2 characters in it, it's theoretically limited to 2 shot setups, one from Mark, one from Jez, so they have to work around it. And so they do what YouTubers do, where while they clearly just have the one shot setup, when they hit a point in the sentence that they want to emphasise, they'll cut to a slight close-up of that same shot to try and trick your brain into thinking that the video is much more dynamic than it actually is, when what you've obviously done is just shot with the same camera setup and zoomed in editing. While this technique can feel lazy when YouTubers do it, Peep Show's usage of it feels infinitely more calculated. Like in this interaction that we're definitely coming back to throughout this video, where Jeremy confronts Mark about his unhealthy relationship with Sophie.
You asking Sophie to get married?
Yeah?
I mean, it's brilliant and everything, but I was just wondering, have you considered, like, not doing it?
Not doing it?
Is it really a good idea?
I don't know, I kind of assumed it was because I spend all my time thinking about it. I'm obsessed with it.
The cut to a slightly closer view mimics Mark's point of view where he leans in and he actually pays proper attention to what's being said for a change. Wait a minute, actually, yeah, you might be onto something. I just thought you were waffling your usual shit until you hit that point in the sentence. So far as style goes, Peep Show is incredibly unconventional. It's a distinctive evolution of its simpler framework. David Mitchell himself has admitted that without the point of view style, it would basically be like any other British sitcom about dysfunctional 20 to 30 somethings like men behaving badly. So let's take a look at its framework. In media discussion and interviews, Peep Show always got referred to as a modern British odd couple. The history of the Odd Couple is so vast and complicated that it could easily lend itself to a much more intensive hour-long video essay all of its own, and I'm not going to pretend I'm some kind of authority on it because inevitably I will get things wrong. The short version is that The Odd Couple was a play written by Neil Simon that debuted on Broadway in 1965. The Odd Couple then became the classic 1968 American comedy film about a neurotic neat freak named Felix who gets thrown out by his wife and moves in with his friend Oscar, who's a slob and basically the complete opposite of him. Oscar and his wife also recently separated, so while he and Felix are different in personality type, they're going through similar experiences. And the result is they start bickering as if they were a married couple.
Felix, when are you and I gonna have some fun, a little relaxation? Get out of the house.
What are you talking about? We have fun. Eat over the plate.
The success of the play and then the film led to a sitcom in 1970 that ran for over 100 episodes and is probably the main thing that you think of when you think of The Odd Couple. There was also a cartoon, a revival of the sitcom, this time starring Matthew Perry, rest in peace. And there's probably 1,000 more things, and its influence on pop culture is immeasurably massive. I'd never actually seen the original film before, and in watching it I was instantly reminded of things that it probably influenced either directly or secondhand. In this scene where Oscar consoles Felix over being kicked out by his wife in the cafe, I was instantly reminded of multiple scenes of Jerry Seinfeld talking down to George Costanza when his life's fallen apart for the 1,000th time. There was that episode of Friends where Ross moves in with Joey and Chandler after his second marriage falls apart, which is basically just The Odd Couple but with 2 Oscars instead of 1.
Oh, hey guys, I was wondering if you would maybe chip in for some new air filters for the purifier. I mean, after all, we are all using it.
Who turned off the dehumidifier?
What?
The dehumidifier. Fellas, I asked you, don't play with this thing, huh? I'm trying to get some of the grime out of the air.
I think part of the reason The Odd Couple was so astronomically influential is because it's one of those universal concepts that's so simple and so malleable, and it lends itself to a billion different forms of reinvention. You can fit the story of 2 opposite personality types having to cohabit and rub up against each other to cause comedic situations into so many different contexts and styles. A Christmas Carol was another of these universal stories. Mean rich man gets visited by ghosts of past, present and future and gets taught that you should be nice to people or they'll hate you. A Christmas Carol can be told straight-faced and in the time period it was written, it can be told in the modern day, it can be done seriously or comedically and with Muppets or any other number of popular franchise characters. That said, The Odd Couple isn't just a tale of opposite personalities rubbing up against each other. The element that a good derivative of The Odd Couple can take from it is the fact it's probably one of the most emotionally intelligent 60s classics that I've ever seen. I would highly recommend the original Odd Couple to lonely men who have a hard time handling their emotions. It's less a film about two straight men who cohabit and find themselves turning into a married couple that it seems like, and it's more a film about two men grieving their relationships with their wives and finding comfort in each other. Felix and Oscar treat the other as a surrogate for their wives when they live together, and they find that makes moving on easier.
Marriage may come and go, but the game must go on. So long, Francis.
So long, Blanche.
The best bit of the film by far is when Oscar's arranged a double date for them, even though Felix really isn't ready to start dating just a few weeks after getting thrown out. On the date, when Oscar's out of the room, finding himself unable to make small talk, Felix ends up talking about his wife and the kids, and he starts crying, and he finds the girls are really appreciative of a man who can be sensitive and cry when talking about people meaningful to him.
Please, you mustn't be ashamed. No, I think it's a rare quality in a man to be able to cry. Don't you worry.
Really, this scene is just beautiful. Please watch this film. The joke that survived the decades may be, lol, they're two straight men who start talking like a married couple after living together. But it's more a story about how men relate to each other and understand their feelings and can depend on each other in spite of their differences. While Oscar may grow to hate living with Felix over the course of the film, he took him in because he saw his friend was suffering and he wanted to help, despite his instincts to try and shy away from actually addressing any of the trauma that his friend may be going through, because that would mean that Oscar would have to face up to the fact he's clearly not over his own trauma, which he starts out in denial about because he wants to see himself as this cool, suave new bachelor who doesn't have feelings, whereas Felix wears his heart on his sleeve.
All right, then you asked for it. You're a wonderful guy, Oscar. You've done everything for me. You took me in here, you gave me a place to live, you gave me something to live for.
Oscar helped Felix when he was in need of a place to live, and Felix helped Oscar open up emotionally. I personally think The Odd Couple has survived because structurally it's a work of utter genius, because it's recognised that underneath the joke there needs to be a genuine exchange of emotions going on. And Peep Show takes that structure and runs with it. Conversations I would typically have with people about Peep Show would revolve around the question, are you a Mark or are you a Jeremy? When I started tweeting about Peep Show again, I had someone telling me that I'm clearly a Mark, which I see why. Mark is incredibly depressed, has rock bottom self-worth, and speaks in this very verbose way full of esoteric references both inside of his head and out of it.
She knows about qubits, she's not comfortable in her own skin, she's one of me.
Stands to reason that someone would think I'm a Mark given my outward appearance that I give off on this channel. However, while I am a ball of neuroses like Mark, I am also kind of a slob like Jeremy. I dress almost exactly like Jeremy, my room is covered in junk that I haven't bothered looking at in ages and probably won't until about 6 years in the future when I pick it up and I think, wait, why do I own this again? I'm not an obsessive neat freak like Mark, and like Jeremy, I do creative things in my spare time, and I'm impressed with my efforts with relatively little evidence for its actual worth. I do have a day job, but I'm not obsessed with the day job like Mark is, to whom getting a more impressive looking keyboard makes it genuinely one of the best days of his life.
Think she's spotted it. Yeah, that's right, sweetheart. Ergonomic management keyboard.
And yet, unlike Jez, I hate parties, socialising in general, and the idea of being jobless and having no money sends me into fits of abject terror. I'm sort of in the middle between Mark and Jeremy, and lots of us who really connected with Peep Show are like that in some way. And Mark and Jeremy are much more alike than they may appear to be on the surface. Mitchell and Webb's interplay is unparalleled, and has obviously been finely honed over a very long period of time. At the point of Peep Show's opening episode, they've been working together for nearly a decade, and this has obviously rubbed off on Mark and Jeremy's speech patterns and the type of things they say, as these are roles that have been specifically written for David and Robert.
Okay, I've got two bits of bad news, one affecting me and the other affecting you. Which do you want to hear first?
the one affecting me, then I can have the one affecting you as dessert.
From his appearances in other media, it does feel like David Mitchell is Mark Corrigan, but Robert Webb seems to be less Jeremy Osborne because you wouldn't be able to maintain any kind of professional life if your core character trait was screw up. But the way they speak to and about others is much more similar than you would think if you assume they're comedic opposites.
What? Die for me? Away!
Away? What way?
If this was on television, nobody would be watching. Oh God, why aren't we watching television?
While yeah, they are an odd couple, they do complement each other incredibly well and almost act as two halves of this theoretical whole person. It's harder to see what Jez brings to the relationship in this version of the odd couple because in the original, Oscar the Slob gives Felix the neat freak a home, while Felix gives Oscar the means to access his emotions. In this case, Mark, the neurotic one, is the one that's letting Jez, the slob, live in their flat rent-free, and Jez isn't even emotionally intelligent enough to understand his own feelings.
I've had this really bad feeling, like, in my brain, and...
It's called guilt, Jeremy. Most people feel it quite a bit when they've done something wrong.
So how could Jeremy really be giving Mark anything? Jez appears to basically be a parasite, but he does actually serve a vital role to keep Mark grounded. It's just harder to see. While yes, he does cross the line almost all the time in the pursuit of his own hedonistic pleasure, like when Mark's sick and Jez wants a party in the flat, so he gives him too much medicine in the hope that he sleeps through it.
I'm sort of poisoning my flatmate. Is that okay? Doesn't sound great. Why did you poison your flatmate? So I could have a party.
However, there are occasions where Jeremy actually shows concern for Mark's well-being. One of my favourite scenes is where Mark's got nothing for his big presentation at a conference, and Jeremy comes in to comfort him. Granted, the context of this scene is Jeremy kissed Sophie, Mark's fiancée at this point, and he's feeling guilty, but listen to that tone of his voice and what he says. I do hear some genuine concern there.
What's on the piece of paper, Mark?
What?
Is there something on that piece of paper that's made you sad?
You know what this piece of paper says, Jeremy? This piece of paper says that I am fucked.
Oh, that's horrible. Who sent you that?
Both of them are dismissive of each other inside of their heads and see the other as the lesser half of the flatmate relationship.
Work-shy freeloader.
Tight-fisted cockmuncher.
And yeah, Mark's got more of a reason to think this way than Jeremy does. Jeremy's entire life would fall completely to pieces without Mark, as he explains on Mark's wedding day when it looks like Mark's about to leave for good.
I mean, am I going to live here, like, on my own? And who's going to do the forms for, like, the TV and the gas and the water? Me? Don't you see? None of this works, Mark.
So yeah, the obvious conclusion is that Jez is the parasite. However, if you're asking the question, where would Jeremy be without Mark, you've also got to ask, where would Mark be without Jeremy? What Jeremy gets from Mark is practical and living situation related. However, the perspective that Jez offers Mark on his life isn't exactly worthless. Easily the best scene in Peep Show is the one in the Series 3 finale that I mentioned earlier. Mark's booked the hotel that weekend with the goal of asking Sophie to marry him. This is what the show has been building towards. Mark is now with the woman that he was chasing for the first 2 series. He's at the point where he's going to ask her to marry him. And it only takes 60 seconds after Jeremy finally prods him and asks him why does he love her for Mark to realise his mistake.
When I was at the height of Sophie madness, it was when, you know, watching her across a hot photocopier, the little looks.
Before you really had a relationship.
Exactly. It's almost like the more we've got to know each other, the worse it's been.
Maybe that's a sign?
Oh my God, I don't have to marry her.
Yes, Jeremy screws Mark over on many occasions. He has sex with Sophie's mother on the first weekend that Mark goes to visit her parents after the engagement, and then pushes her dad to burn a rival's barn down. He then sleeps with Sophie herself around the time that she and Mark are arranging the divorce, in the middle of which she gets pregnant, and there's the inevitable question over whether Mark or Jeremy is the father. However, the whole Sophie relationship was obviously bad for Mark, so it didn't really matter what Jez did in those situations that much. Jez sees these as a free-for-all, but in the really important moments where Mark's happiness is actually on the line, he usually comes through. He's recognised that Sophie doesn't make Mark happy and has a set of wholly logical questions to prod his mate in the right direction, which he keeps up over the course of Series 4. Although he does fail, of course. Jeremy's core character trait is screw up, and it makes sense that he even fails to achieve the few good things he tries to do for Mark. Even the little things. Even though he hates the wedding idea and is pushing Mark to be honest and call the whole thing off, he plans Mark's ideal stag weekend and promises to modify his behaviour to make him happy.
I've booked us a canal boat near an Iron Age area, and you can go and look at the Iron Age or whatever it is you do, and I'll make us some steaks.
But then 5 seconds into it he gets bored.
Right, but this is just it. This is totally it. There's not going to be any waves or mad shit.
No.
Could I water ski off the back?
You're very welcome to try.
Jeremy's instincts are to protect Mark's interests. He just can't help his impulses. Of course, this is rooted in his upbringing, where he was never challenged by his mother. We actually meet his mum in Series 5, and she's obviously been enabling his bad behaviour over the years by failing to challenge him when he's done something wrong.
Mummy, coffee, fucky hurry uppy.
Unlike his mum, Mark does challenge Jeremy. In this episode in Series 5, he openly states that he's going to kick him out because it's his flat, Jeremy never pays rent, and he's always stealing his stuff, and he's always making the excuse, I'm a creative, I can't get a job like everyone else. Problem is, Mark isn't exactly the sort of character that can command respect.
Yeah, might just Robin Hood this baby.
A sausage has gone! Oh my God, Jeremy, a sausage is missing!
Mark tries every possible tactic to get Jeremy to sort his life out. He tries the more diplomatic approach in this episode in Series 1, where he claims to support Jeremy's music even though he really doesn't. And he explains the harsh reality in a kind way and gets him an interview for a clerical job at his office. Although his intent here isn't quite as pure as it seems. He does get an illicit thrill from the idea of Jeremy working under him.
Great. He'll be able to pay off the Blockbuster's fine. Plus, I'll be able to order him around. Jeremy, could you file this for me? Jeremy, could you take that for me? Jeremy, could you suck this for me? Jesus, where did that come from?
If anything, Jeremy's the more supportive of the two, at least in terms of actually wanting Mark to do what's clearly best for him. Whenever Mark's pushing Jeremy to make better life choices, it usually comes from a place of imagining an ideal world where Jeremy's better life choices will make Mark's life more efficient. Mark only seems to actually value Jeremy in cases like the last episode of Series 5 where he's joined a cult, and he seems to be getting his life in order. He cleans the flat and he's behaving more like the functioning member of society that Mark had been begging him to be for such a long time.
And I've been to Tesco to stock up on milk and bread. We were running a bit low.
You've cleaned the what?
The kitchen. See you later. I'm off out today and tomorrow to my course.
But then, Jeremy says that he's moving out and into the centre. Mark seems okay with this, and it seems like this is it. Jeremy's leaving forever. This is the end of the Mark and Jeremy story. But then, as Jez's guilt about sleeping with Sophie gets to him, he comes back in to confess, and upon seeing him, Mark actually shows some proper warmth to him.
I don't think you should go. You do know that, don't you? I'll come and get you if you like. I'll happily deprogram you.
Yeah, thanks, man.
So even though in a weird way the cult seems to be a good thing for Jeremy, Mark would prefer the status quo, as much as he complains about the status quo constantly. The point of Peep Show may appear to be on the surface that Jeremy is the toxic one, dragging the almost half-functional Mark down with him, but really the parasite could be either of them. And this is made clearer by having a third component to the odd couple dynamic. The character of Superhands, Jeremy's best friend and other half of his band, essentially exists to be a more exaggerated version of Jeremy to make Jeremy look warmer and more grounded by comparison. Superhands basically has no structure to him at all. When he needs to be, he's off his face and driving a wedge between Mark and Jez and making situations worse.
He's got nuts. Get off! You need to section him, he's out of his mind. He was running around with his cock out before saying it was on fire.
Sometimes he's got his head screwed on right and is in the superior position to Mark when Mark's either been fired or had a stupid idea.
As of this morning, I'm your boss. Grab us a large latte and a pan of raisin, would you mind?
Superhands is pure chaos, whereas Jeremy is sort of half chaos, with the potential to be a halfway decent human being if the circumstances align correctly. Like Oscar is with Felix in The Odd Couple, he can actually be quite parental to Mark sometimes. Jeremy actually starts to show some proper growth in the last couple of series where he tries to become a life coach. even though he vainly thinks that he knows as much as an actual therapist, and his techniques are wildly off and openly ruin several people's relationships. Based on what he'd been doing to Mark over the years without really thinking about it, weirdly enough, life coach doesn't actually seem like a completely terrible idea for him. Jeremy may be stupid and impulsive, but he's not totally malevolent.
What's this? Mummy?
Mummy is probably the turkey's nickname. It could easily be.
Okay, I do know that people who know this series well are going to have a hard time swallowing this argument. But this is why I actually did kinda buy it in this rather strange episode from Series 8, where Mark believes he's found a publisher for his weird uncommercial book comparing modern business strategies with ancient Egyptian pharaohs. And Jeremy is the one warning him that it's a scam.
I'm going to say 2 words that you don't want to hear: vanity publishing. I just think you need to be realistic about your targets, aims and expectations.
Mark is usually the sensible one, and it seems odd that he'd fall for such an obvious scam, and it seems weird that Jeremy would be wise to it, given he's failed to see through obvious scams in various episodes before this. But this kinda lines up for me, because he's shown through basically every stage of the series that he does actually care about Mark's well-being. Whereas Mark's ego is completely out of control by Series 8, and he's always thought of himself as much smarter than he actually is. Jeremy can't always save himself from his own impulses, but he can try and save Mark from things that are obviously bad for him. The Mark and Jez relationship is a symbiotic relationship, more than the parasitical one that it appears to be. And this becomes more obvious as Jeremy actually finds work in Series 7 and starts looking for a genuine purpose in his life. Jeremy does want what's best for Mark, even if Mark has a hard time realising it. David Mitchell is one of those actors where people seem to have this inability to separate David Mitchell, the person, from the characters that he plays, because they are all usually rooted in the way he comes across on panel shows. Posh, well-spoken, argumentative, sarcastic, and a history enthusiast. This is presented to us as the real-life David Mitchell, and we don't know him personally of course, and don't know how much of that persona is confected and exaggerated for the sake of a good show. You're not going to know who David Mitchell is as a real person based on watching 5 or 6 episodes of Would I Lie to You. It may feel like you do, but it is all in some way a performance, as any kind of media is. Robert Webb doesn't have this problem as much, but David Mitchell's overwhelming presence in British light entertainment means that you're always going to see a David Mitchell character as David Mitchell himself. And Mark Corrigan is built in that mould. He's old before his time, a stick in the mud, a history enthusiast, but there's a lot more nuance to him than you might think if you just look at him as the David Mitchell character. Like any actor, the character's life story and development affects his performance. The Mark Corrigan of Series 1 and 2 is very different to the Mark Corrigan of Series 6 and 7, and it's all rooted in his emotional growth. In the first half of the show, Mark is a ball of neuroses who keeps everything to himself, and this makes sense based on his upbringing. His dad shows up in his thoughts quite a lot and suggests that he was quite an emotionally distant and stern figure, and Mark learned from that, and so like his father, he bottles his feelings up and just gets on with things.
My dad literally congratulated me, Jez. He sent me a greetings card with a pre-printed message expressing a good deal of happiness.
We do actually meet his father in the Christmas special in Series 7, which I feel is a bit of a mistake. The actor who plays his dad does a fantastic job of being this intimidating slimeball who's even more old-fashioned than Mark is.
I don't know if it really is traditional, actually.
Could you not slip a muzzle on your woman, please, Mark?
But I think Mark's father works better as a concept, where he's this unseen malevolent force in Mark's psyche, almost like his father is some Lovecraftian being, more terrifying than we could possibly imagine. Being inside Mark's head during the first few series is like a form of torture. Almost every thought he has is putting him down in some way and emphasising how inferior he is to others.
I have very little to say to my closest friends. What the hell am I going to say to a fully grown man for a whole night?
While Mark is opinionated, like real-life David Mitchell, outside of people that he doesn't have any respect for, like Jez and Superhands, his opinions typically stay inside of his head. His train of thought may sound like David Mitchell doing a comedy rant, but the difference is that that comedy rant is not coming out of his mouth.
Brilliant. The woman you love has only been single for a few minutes, but already you've found her a nice new boyfriend. Nice work, Mr. Fucking Stupid.
because Mark just isn't the type of person who can speak his mind. Mark Corrigan is entirely unlike real-life David Mitchell, because you watch David Mitchell on a panel show, this is clearly not a man who has trouble speaking his mind.
On my wife's phone, I hear these messages coming, making that horrible noise that to me sounds sort of mildly carcinogenic.
Sure, Mark is posh and British like David Mitchell, and a plotline about someone posh and British being too embarrassed to admit to the woman that he's engaged to that he's had serious second thoughts about the wedding makes a lot of sense, but does that make sense for David Mitchell the person? Because having watched him on panel shows over the years, I really don't see this being the type of situation that the real David Mitchell would ever let himself get into.
What, so you're going to get married to her out of embarrassment?
There are worse reasons.
So you're going to stay married to this woman for the rest of your life because of embarrassment?
And yet we buy it, because the writing and Mitchell's skill at delivering Mark's inner monologues have created this highly credible ball of neuroses. Mark does start to become more like the real-life David Mitchell later in the series after various developments, but this is all organic development, and it's typified by two distinct eras in his life based on his two main love interests, Sophie from series 1 to 4 and Dobby in series 5 to 8. During Sophie, he's the Mark Corrigan who suffers from serious social anxiety and desperately just wants to fit in, be normal, and start a relationship with the most normal woman in the office who he has a vague hint of a connection with. During Dobby, he's the Mark Corrigan who comes to accept that he isn't like everyone else and goes for someone who seems to be the complete opposite of Sophie, but he still has that residual self-loathing left over from the Sophie incident that's informing his bad decisions, and like before, it ends badly. So I've separated the next two sections of this video into the Sophie and Dobby arcs. I don't know if I'm the only one who struggled to readjust my brain to Hollywood royalty Olivia Colman from the defining voice of British TV Olivia Colman. I know Americans will know who Olivia Colman is now, but I don't know if they understand the extent to just how present she was on British TV in the 2000s and 2010s. Seriously, she was everywhere. Doctor Who, Broadchurch, cult comedy classic Green Wing, turn on a random repeat of Midsummer Murders, oh look, there's Olivia Colman. I recently went to an independent cinema in London, and they must not have re-recorded their pre-movie sweepers for a while, because the movie clips they showed were all from films from about 8 or 9 years ago. And who do you think was doing the voiceover? Oh look, it's Olivia Colman. Olivia has this very warm and reassuring voice and demeanour, and her presence alone suddenly makes any show or film more likeable, even if the character she's playing is kind of twisted, and the role I'm always going to associate her with is Sophie Chapman. Sophie, as she appears at the start of Peep Show, is a very different person to the one we eventually see her as by Series 5.
Remember, it's just Barbara and Lucy in there. Relax, have a bloody good laugh.
You're right, totally right.
Look like a life support machine, Mark.
Well, thank you, Sophie.
Instead of giving life, you suck it all out of people.
Although the reason for this is incredibly interesting, and it's a great example of character development happening in the background. She doesn't just change for the sake of this being a sitcom format where Mark's life has to continue being a living hell because otherwise the show wouldn't work, although she does continue to make it a living hell for that purpose. The show has this limited perspective where we will always only ever see a scene with either Mark or Jeremy in it. There are all these characters like Sophie or Superhands walking around at the edges of their lives, and while Sophie in particular is off screen, she's developing and changing based off of Mark's actions. Just you might not see it. Sophie starts as this distant love interest across the office from Mark, where he's constantly daydreaming about the day that the only woman who's ever shown any warmth to him might be his wife. But we don't really know her that well at this point. In the first episode of Series 2, Mark is trying to get closer to Sophie, so he cracks the password to her email and he starts modifying his behaviour based on what he reads to trick Sophie into thinking that they're more alike than they actually are.
Mark's clever and funny, but he's so serious. I wish we could just be mates for a while, but he's so uptight.
Okay.
This is horrifying behaviour on Mark's part, but the events of this episode don't come up again. Sophie finds out he did this, is horrified, and then it's just forgotten about at the beginning of the next episode. And the direction of Series 2 leads towards Mark and Sophie getting together, but he violated her trust here in a completely unforgivable way. And the fact Sophie doesn't bring this incident up at all throughout the ensuing relationship is weird, right?
Mark, is that my email?
No, it's not. It's not. It's just a...
Escape!
This is a traditional fact of sitcoms, of course. Typically, episodes operate in a bottle, and consequences of major changes in character dynamics turn into ongoing issues only on rare occasions. It's only really ever a couple broke up, got married, moved in together, or had a baby that leave any long-lasting impact on characters for better or worse. Incidents like Mark cracking Sophie's email are just another day on a sitcom, but I think this particular violation of Sophie's trust is more significant than the framework makes it seem. Mark's not perfect. Sophie doesn't actually seem to like him that much. In Series 1 they leave each other friendly little doodles and chat in the office occasionally, and whenever Mark makes it clear that his feelings for her run deep, she gives him the trademarked, polite Olivia Colman smile as she fobs him off. So Sophie starts going out with Jeff in Series 2, but things go sour when Jeff, cocky and arrogant as ever, gets off with a girl in a pub and the trust between them starts to break down. Mark is a complete mess over the course of Series 2, and his jealousy and self-loathing eating away at him is all the proof that we need that his infatuation with Sophie isn't actually love, it's obsession. But the thing is, Sophie hadn't actually seen much of this breakdown. The viewer knows just how bad Mark would be for her because his strategic thinking is more like a war game with his rival than an actual need for a relationship with the woman that he claims to love.
Okay, well, basically, Jeff got off with this girl.
Oh my god! I've hit the mother load! This is what I've been waiting for! I can really fuck him with this!
Sophie doesn't know that much about what's going on. She just gets occasional signs of Mark doing crazy shit like the email incident. And that gets forgotten about because she's focused on what's going on with Jeff. So when Mark finally manages, almost by accident, to deliver the perfect romantic line just after she's broken up with Jeff, something starts to happen.
So what do you think to Karen?
Oh, she's nice.
Great.
She just isn't
Isn't what?
you.
And so they start dating in Series 3, the only series where Mark and Sophie are an item and both parties seem to actively want to be together. Although it's far from perfect. Sophie gets transferred to Bristol and their relationship has to be long distance for a while, and during this long distance phase it gets tested. A weird phone call from a former friend of Mark and Jez's who's having a psychotic episode sparks what she thinks is a breakup while she's away.
Mary?
Oh, she told me, Mark. I called and she answered. She was in your bed, all tucked up tight, as she put it.
Mary's nuts, Sophie. She's mentally ill. She's been incarcerated. Honestly, she's in hospital. I can give you her reference number.
Oh, right, well, okay, so as far as you're concerned, we're still...
You haven't done anything, have you, Soph?
No. Not really.
And this never gets mentioned again. Clearly neither of these two trust each other. And Sophie has much more of a reason to distrust Mark because of the email hacking and her recent breakup with Jeff. But these issues never get resolved at the ends of episodes. People just forget and move on. There's barely a single romantic moment between them whenever Sophie's home. But she's in her mid-30s and she wants a marriage and kids fairly soon. And even if Mark is obviously unreliable and unstable, he has that David Mitchell stern authoritative quality about him where he seems reliable and stable. So Sophie overlooks all of the flaws for now and thinks, well, I have to see where this is going, don't I? Otherwise this is all a complete waste of time, isn't it? And I don't have much time. So they do all the old standards. They go to a fun fair, they go to a cinema.
Yeah, that was fun. Oh, I feel awful. I suppose doing things you hate is just the price you pay to avoid loneliness.
They're even having a terrible time in the Series 3 finale on the holiday that Mark's arranged so he can propose to her.
She goes looking for fun after just a minute of uncomfortable silence. Well, you better get used to it, honey, because when we're married, there'll be a lot more where that came from.
And Mark doesn't even propose to her. She finds the ring and assumes that he proposed just after Jez has prodded Mark into having the epiphany that he's not actually in love with her.
Accidentally found something round and engagement-y.
Oh, right.
God, I've not got it wrong, have I? You were going to...
Oh, yeah, no.
Well then, yes.
Right then. Hooray.
I mentioned Friends earlier, and those that watched it might remember a similar episode where Joey almost accidentally proposes to Rachel using Ross's ring. Rachel assumes that must be what he's doing and accepts it.
Yeah, but you said, will you marry me?
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did. Oh my God, you didn't.
It was a really stupid episode. A farce over what's assumed to be a proposal is a difficult idea to genuinely buy, but it works a lot better in Peep Show's case because of Mark being this character who bottles everything up and approaches romance entirely through strategy and not through emotions.
She found the ring.
Right.
She said yes, she accepted.
But you hadn't asked, so you accepted the acceptance.
Well, I had to, it was checkmate, there was no way out.
Except for telling her how you felt.
But none of this comes out until the last possible moment.
I think you're right. I shouldn't marry Sophie. I should call it off.
Brilliant! One thing, you have left it pretty late. There will be a jilting.
And Series 4 mostly treats this as Mark's fault, because he's not admitting to Sophie that he doesn't love her, because it's mostly told from his perspective. He's always looking for excuses to get out of the wedding. Maybe it'll come out in couples therapy. Oh, so Jez and Sophie kissed. This is my excuse. Thing is though, what's happening with Sophie in Series 4? She's with Mark all the time. She must know on some level that Mark doesn't really love her and is desperately looking for any excuse to call off the wedding. That's not exactly easy to hide. But she doesn't say anything until just after she said I do, just like Mark does, after making it perfectly clear in public that he doesn't really want to go through with this.
Oh, great. Now she's crying. Look at me. I'm one of those men women read about in their magazines.
Mark and Sophie only have one thing in common. They're both so desperate to have a conventional life story where they meet someone, get married in their early 30s and start having kids just like everyone else. So they'll desperately push that feeling that something's not right here down until it's too late.
Divorce annulled. I can't. This isn't what I want. He's horrible.
As a result of the failed wedding, Mark and Sophie both learn the same lesson, but Sophie applies this lesson in the right way, while Mark applies it in the wrong way. Sophie from this point on follows her instincts and does what she feels is right, because she wasn't doing that in trying desperately hard to make her relationship with Mark work and ignoring all the flaws that he has perfectly demonstrated to her throughout the show. She wants a baby, so she gets it by sleeping with Jez and Mark. With Mark, the condom just happens to break, and she sees this as a happy accident, while Mark is terrified.
It's not. It's been in my wallet so long, I think the rubber may have perished.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear.
I suppose, just to be on the safe side, morning after pill, you could...
Chances are on a one-off, nothing's...
So why are you sitting like that?
Like what?
Like that?
Look, this is just how I'm going to sit. I like sitting like this.
Stop sitting like that.
No.
When she is pregnant, her birthday present to Mark is driving lessons, which are more a present for her than they are for him, because if Mark knew how to drive, it would make having a kid easier. Granted, she's not exactly the most sympathetic or respectable character in the world during this process, but the point is Sophie becomes more assertive rather than passively accepting the office romance followed by marriage and kids story that she expected her life to be, because being passive led to the public humiliation with Mark, so she's not doing that again. Mark also learns that being passive led to the most humiliating moment in his life, and that trying to fit himself into that conventional office romance followed by kids mold didn't make him happy. And so he goes for someone who appears to be the opposite type of person to Sophie, and he tries to be assertive this time, but he still fails to be honest with her or himself. Okay, so Mark's relationship with a conventional woman who works in the same office as him, she likes a drink, has friends, and could be vaguely described as normal, didn't work. So Mark goes in the complete opposite direction, and as a result we get the inverse version of the Mark, Jeff, Sophie love triangle. Dobby, birth name Debbie but everyone calls her Dobby, is an IT worker who's just started at Mark's office, and she's very carefree and open about being an oddball who doesn't fit in.
Your mate's playing a gig, check it out. Mark, you're not trying to get away with pretending you're a normal human being, are you?
She plays fantasy RPGs and even does live role-playing. She and Mark click immediately, and you do see why. Mark's an outsider at work at this point, shunned by everyone who's taken Sophie's side. He's got even more of a justification for his train of thought reminding him at every juncture that he's a freak than ever. But here's someone who embraces being abnormal, and she seems to like him. So much so that they have a shockingly steamy encounter in a stationery cupboard on the day that they first meet.
Oh God, I'm getting very... Captain Corrigan is flying without a license.
But that first encounter kinda says it all about the problem with Mark going for someone who seems to be the opposite of Sophie. Because while Dobby is the opposite of Sophie, she's still not suited for Mark. Because having this type of encounter on the day they meet seems quite out of character for Mark. He's had impulsive moments occasionally, like that date in Series 1, but Mark is the sort of person who needs rigorous planning to try and avoid any possibility of humiliation. Never works obviously, but look at how horrified he looks here. This need for rigorous structure for his romantic relationships gets revealed to be the problem. Mark approaches his relationship with Dobby in a very similar way to what he did with Sophie. He treats relationships like job applications.
Does that actually mean that there's a position vacant as your boyfriend?
What an incredibly off-putting way of putting it.
Trying to win Dobby over is a process of Facebook stalking and going out of his way to meet her based more on his background research than a process of actually trying to get to know her and actually having genuine shared interests.
Dobby, I had no idea you came here.
Every other Sunday when live-action role plays off-season.
It's cool, isn't it?
It's the same deal as when he hacked Sophie's emails. And when he does get to know who the real Dobby is, like Sophie, it starts to become obvious that that encounter in the stationery cupboard was an actual red flag that he should have paid more attention to. Dobby and Mark may both be socially abnormal, so in theory they'd fit together, but the difference is that she's carefree and Mark isn't. Throughout the relationship, Mark's always trying to make Dobby fit inside the rigid guidelines of a life that he wants for himself. When they actually get together, they don't really do much. They mostly just seem to stay inside watching series box sets while Dobby talks about all the wild things she wants for herself, none of which fit with Mark.
I've been thinking we should go interrailing for 3 weeks maybe, or a month. Stay in hostels, it wouldn't cost much.
I think I hate and fear all facets of that idea.
But unlike Sophie, where he was trying to reshape himself into the sort of person that Sophie would want to be with, in this case, Mark starts trying to reshape Dobby into the type of person that he would want to be with.
You've got to live your life, Mark.
Uh-oh, need to shut this down.
Yeah, alright, go for it, Andrew Tate. And Mark starts trying to sabotage his new love rival, Gerard. Unlike Jeff, who's Mark's social superior because he's an extrovert and clearly more well-liked than Mark, Gerard is Mark's inferior. He works under him at JLB and is much more vulnerable than Mark is.
His name's Simon and he's younger, slimmer, better looking and more fashionable than us.
Us? I'm several social ranks your senior. That's the whole basis of our relationship, Gerard.
The Dobby arc is similar to the Sophie arc, it's just Mark's attitude that's changed. Over the second half of Peep Show's lifetime, there's something of a Walter White transformation about Mark.
You are going to die.
It seems to be commonly understood that Mark and Jez are both horrible people, and that's kind of true. But I was more sympathetic to Mark in the first half of the show because the horrible things he says about people are usually confined to his head. We all have horrible thoughts about people sometimes, we just can't help it. So I can forgive Mark when he's thought something horrible, and I can sympathise with him. It's when those thoughts start to come out of his mouth that he becomes much less sympathetic. Granted, he does horrible things in the first half of the show, but something snaps in Mark around the time the wedding falls through. He loses his steady job at JLB Credit and Sophie has his kid. He starts worrying about money. You do notice that he starts speaking his mind a lot more often. Lines that would in series 1 or 2 have been delivered inside of his head start actually coming out of his mouth.
And now you know it's a boy, right?
What, you've seen the scan and it has no penis just like his father?
No, Mark, for real. Sophie said. Did she not tell you?
Sophie?
You understand how he got to this point because Mark has always followed the rules. He's done life right. He got a steady job, tried the office romance, had a kid, and yet he's still got fucked over by anyone and everyone for reasons that aren't always his fault. And so you understand how he snaps and he just thinks, you know what, I'm just going to start speaking my mind and I don't care who knows it. This much more monstrous streak in Mark is drawn into even sharper focus by his love rival over Dobby being the opposite of Jeff. Jeff is the obvious bad guy. It's impossible to sympathise with Jeff. When Jeff and Sophie break up and they walk in on him crying as he rubs her clothes on his face, you feel vindicated. If this was Gerard, you would not feel the same way. Gerard first gets introduced in series 4 and he's like a hyper-exaggerated version of Mark. He walks around with a tube up his nose monitoring his stomach acid levels for some reason. Gerard is a vulnerable little bunny rabbit man, and so now Mark looks like the obvious bad guy. Where Jeff humiliated Mark on a regular basis when they were both in love with Sophie, now Mark humiliates Gerard on a regular basis when they're both in love with Dobby.
You know those Corfu pictures you've got on your profile? I think maybe you should take those down.
Why?
Well, Gerard admitted that sometimes he looks at them and does a...
Oh!
I know.
Mark is utterly loathsome in Series 6 and 7. Having reached the end of his tether a long time ago and not giving a shit anymore is a really bad look on him. He could have gone halfway and it would have been much healthier. He would have been assertive, but at least respectable. Mark in Series 6 and 7 does the scheming and planning against Gerard that he did against Jeff in Series 2, and all of this leads up to the bad thing. The point where everything goes too far. Mark and Jez have done horrible things in the show, but Series 8 Episode 1 is the ultimate low point. Gerard's essentially been defeated. Dobby and Mark are together now, but Dobby is still friendly with Gerard, who's been sick for a while. He's had unexplained health problems over the course of the show, and one day Gerard calls Dobby asking for her to come over because he's sick, but Mark puts his foot down.
Look, Dobbs, sometimes you need to draw a line.
Whoa!
And then...
Gerard's dead.
What?
He's dead.
When?
Last night, a couple of hours after he called.
What did he die of?
Flu.
He died of flu?
I remember feeling a sudden drop in my stomach when I first saw this episode. Mark's jealous streak went so far that he stopped Dobby from going to see him just before he died. Mark couldn't have known that this was about to happen so suddenly, of course. It's not like it's his fault that Gerard died. But there is this implied guilt being thrown in Mark's direction.
I can't believe you cancelled his call so we could have a frozen pizza and watch The Apprentice.
This is what I do to rivals. I put my rivals in the ground.
Even though Mark has essentially already won at the start of Series 8, he and Dobby are together, he should be happy and satisfied with that, but there are all these obvious signals that she's giving him that they're not compatible. She wants to travel and is obviously actively putting off moving in with him. None of this is Gerard's fault, and yet he pays the ultimate price for it. It's also not really Jez's fault when he realises over the course of Series 8 that he's in love with Dobby and that they're obviously much more compatible than she and Mark are. But Mark is so desperate to make it work. This one must work, right? I've done all this work, haven't I? I've tried so damn hard to fit into the mould and have an office romance, married with a kid in my early 30s. That didn't work, so let's try the opposite. This one's got to work, right? Mark's obsessive nature to try so hard to make his life work means that he doesn't let anything happen naturally, and things always get worse as a result. This becomes all the more obvious in the most illuminating Mark story in Series 8, where he meets a woman named Stephanie who just got divorced, who he is the absolute perfect match with.
Do you rinse pre-loading?
Of course I do. Because of
the filter.
Exactly! Who wants to clog the filter?
Jez encourages Mark to have a fling with her, and he is about to, but he's still supposed to be with Dobby, and he just can't let that go, even though he obviously should. I mean, sure, cheating on his partner is bad, he knows that, but this woman would be much better for Mark in the long run, because Dobby isn't really Mark's partner, she's part of his plan. If he'd just let this happen naturally, break up with Dobby and let this thing with Stephanie blossom into a relationship, this is really the happiest that Mark could possibly be. But he just doesn't trust his instincts. He has to have a plan. And that need for a plan is why Mark is destined to remain unhappy. By the final series, Mark doesn't really care who he hurts anymore. The series opens with not the worst thing that he and Jez ever did, but it's up there. Jez moved out in Series 8, and now Mark realises he wants him back, so they conspire to kick his new flatmate out by waterboarding him in a sleeping bag.
Bye, Jerry. See you at work tomorrow.
He also actually enters into an affair this time, albeit he's single at this point, and April, a neurotic woman who, like Stephanie, is pretty compatible with him, isn't. While Mark has changed somewhat for the better by Series 9, he's assertive rather than passive, the fact he's ditched his morality entirely means that even now he can't get what he wants. And just when everything looks like it's about to work out with April, Jez does something incredibly stupid and his happy ending gets unceremoniously ripped away from him, again. Look at what happened. And look at what you've become, Mark. Look at what you've become. common element that runs through basically every piece of media that's ever resonated with me is this sense of solidarity. The earliest film that I remember truly loving as a child was Watership Down. When I say that, most people say, what, really? That animated film that's basically a slasher movie but with rabbits as the protagonists? And it took me a while to understand it too, but looking back it makes perfect sense for me. I was a terrified child who got bullied a lot and found the world to be a scary and intimidating place, and Watership Down was the first film I saw that agreed with me.
All the world will be your enemy, and whenever they catch you, they will kill you. But first, they must catch you.
And Peep Show resonated with me as a teenager and still does for the same reason. It's because it agreed with me about how I felt about the world and the people in it. Throughout those early series, Mark is terrified, pathetic, put down constantly by his colleagues and supposed friends, peer pressured into doing things that he's not comfortable with, always second guessing what everyone thinks of him and trying to alter his behaviour based on what he thinks people might find acceptable based on his observations. But it doesn't work. It doesn't lead to happiness no matter how hard he tries to reshape himself into someone who Sophie will love. That doesn't work, so he tries to reshape Dobby into someone who'll fit with him, but that doesn't work either, and it leads to the death of an innocent man. Peep Show presents a world that's constantly out to get you, and that world only gets worse when Mark tries to stop it from getting him. Then he sacrifices his soul and the actual potential for the happiness that he wants in doing so. Peep Show's ultimate message is, no, you can't win at life. And if you stop trying so hard to win at life, then maybe it'll be, well, not better as such, but at least slightly more tolerable. Thanks for watching, everybody. In case you didn't know, I have a Patreon. Just like everybody else. I'd like to say a special thanks to the following generous people: A. Maxwell, Aidan Jenks, Alistair McPherson, Captain Greza, Charlotte Discordia, Chris Lim, Chris P, Dave Sanders, F.R. Brench, Ivy Kelly, James Morgan Belcher, Jennifer Milligan, Joel, Max Kennedy, Oxbow Izamsti, Robert Conley, Sabrina Wade, The Hickster, and Tony Thompson. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time.